Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Astadia and PrinterOn webinar featuring You Moved to the Cloud, but did your printer? During the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into your chat box on your control panel, and we'll save it for the end of the presentation. We have a great presentation in store for you today. So let's get started. Steve, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Desiree, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining. My name is Steve Lack. I am Vice President of Cloud Solutions here at Astadia, and really happy to have with us Tom Barber, who's the CTO of PrinterOn today. I think this is a really interesting topic and something, as I think many of you will find out, often gets thought of after the fact, when it should be really thought of beforehand. So today we're just going to talk about Astadia and PrinterOn briefly, and then really get into the topic at hand, which is, well, you thought of everything you're migrating, right? Talk about secure cloud printing, design and architecture, and those things that you need to worry about. And certainly, as things get, let's call it, cloudized, one of the first things that happens is mobile and mobile applications. You have a lot of also road warriors from hotel rooms and remote locations, and what do they do from there, and also how does a move to the cloud affect desktop printing as well. And then, of course, we've set some time aside for Q&A at the end, and as Desiree mentioned, just please enter your questions in the chat box, and we'll certainly get to them at the end of the presentation. So that said, let me get started. For those of you that don't know us, Astadia is a full-service technology consulting firm helping our clients maximize the impact and minimize the risk in today's blended enterprise and cloud ecosystem. We call it that as we don't believe that every application and workload can nor should be moved to the cloud, and there's certainly still be on-premise requirements, as we'll be discussing today. We offer a full suite of services from cloud assessments and migrations, even legacy workloads on mainframes, for example, to DevOps, to a full suite of managed services from the desktop to the data center to cloud. Little Astadia commercial, so thank you for that. As you can see, and as I'm sure most of you are aware, the cloud market is expected to grow from 19 billion to 122 billion in 4 years, which is just an astounding growth rate. And it's just a veritable gold rush out there, trying to take advantage of everything that cloud computing brings to the table, such as pay-as-you-go, scalability, elasticity. But with that staggering growth, it makes sense that there's also an increase in a reliance on managed service companies to help get these workloads to the cloud and manage them, including everything from identity management, which you will find is relevant in this scenario we're talking today, to cost optimization and certainly, of course, printing. This chart is kind of an example of what we're seeing within our customer base and the industry in general. Folks have typically started by dipping their toe in the cloud waters, setting up a simple dev test environment, and slowly moving up the complexity scale as they get more comfortable with cloud capabilities and even the limitations. This eventually includes moving workloads as well as more sophisticated app dev environments, directory services, and as I mentioned earlier, certainly mobile applications are becoming more and more a component of this. We have found that customers then suddenly have that aha moment, I'll call it right now, as oh no, how do I deal with printing now? So luckily, Astadia and PrinterOn have an answer to that, as you will find out, and we're happy to have Tom here from PrinterOn to show you multiple ways to deal with cloud and mobile printing. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Tom to take it on from here.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate your time and attention today to talk about the subject of you're going to the cloud, but what about your printer? And luckily, PrinterOn actually is built to do exactly that and deal with that question. So really what we're saying is don't leave secure enterprise print services behind in building your cloud migration strategy. Deal with the issue right up front. It's one of those issues that's not glamorous, not exciting, but it does cause problems if you leave it to the very end. And really what we're talking about here at PrinterOn, let's be clear, we're not talking about convenient cloud printing to your home printer in your personal life. We're talking about secure cloud printing services for your enterprise. And by that enterprise, we mean anything up to and including a global organization. So really what we're saying is any cloud, any network or networks in between, any devices, meaning desktop, laptop, smartphone, tablet, any printing devices, small or large, PrinterOn is essentially a secure enterprise cloud printing platform. And we can deploy that in a way that's either managed by you, the end client, or Astadia, or by PrinterOn as a managed service. It's really up to you and dependent on your entire IT strategy. Some of the benefits that you can expect to receive by moving enterprise printing services to the cloud is, well, it can save time and money, first of all, by reducing what most enterprises have in their infrastructure, which are a bunch of legacy print servers that actually do nothing but service user print requests. And when you get down into the details, this part of the IT infrastructure can actually be quite expensive to buy, upgrade, and the labor to manage it. So this is an opportunity for savings. The second part of the savings comes from essentially the elastic nature of the processing power inherent in a cloud architecture. So, for instance, if you have a seasonal kind of a business that requires print workflows to be serviced at double, triple, or even 10 times the capacity, let's say, during the busy season, then you, with a cloud service, it can set up the service such that it only consumes that resource during the season, and then it frees up the resource when it's off season, and the payment for the service is commensurate with the capacity, and therefore that's another savings opportunity. In other words, no longer do you have to view print services as something you have to build an on-premise infrastructure for to handle your peak load during the season. Some other benefits that some are quantitative, some are qualitative. It can improve mobile work efficiency. Certain mobile work print workflows require print, and they are very difficult to incorporate the print function depending on what the workflow is. We solve that problem. It improves the security of printing. People are now starting to consider the print workflow and infrastructure as not only something that can get sensitive corporate data on paper and distributed where it shouldn't be, but also printers as a means for attack on the corporate network. And then also reducing IT management complexity. And again, this comes from sort of the legacy nature of the print infrastructure, how it was built way back when, all the way back to when Windows came out and host printing systems came out, and it still essentially remains unchanged today. Well, at PrinterOn, we moved that all into the cloud era. And did we mention it's secure? So as was mentioned before, one of the key points in any cloud infrastructure is to figure out how you're going to authenticate users, and you would be happy to know that PrinterOn today supports all the most popular cloud-based identity management schemes, and really including anything that is compliant with the OpenID Connect identity management standard. All the data is encrypted from one point to the other and all the points in between using industry standard encrypted web services running over TLS. And in addition to that, we can encrypt print data payload when it's at rest, sitting on the service somewhere in between the two endpoints. So overall, what we're saying, PrinterOn is secure cloud printing, any cloud, any network, any device, managed by you, managed by Astadia, or managed by PrinterOn. It's up to you. So with that, let's get into sort of the meat of the things. And then I will give you a warning up front. Some of the topics are general, some are a bit technical. There's a mix and match of both, and we'll have questions for time at the end for any clarification. So we're going to learn who and what is PrinterOn, what's the architecture look like, how do we handle those cloud-based users and authentication to the service, and then what are the main use cases in an enterprise organization. So first, a little bit about PrinterOn. Well, PrinterOn is secure cloud, mobile, and desktop printing for any cloud. And by any cloud, we actually include the definition of private cloud, meaning on-premise behind your own firewall, or in a third-party cloud that is still private, but you're outsourcing to, for instance, Microsoft with Azure, or Amazon, or IBM with SoftLayer, or any number of third-party commercial cloud providers. We like to think we were the first to invent this whole concept way back actually in 2001. And so you can see we've been in business for 16 years with, ironically, the same product architecture, which has proved us real well. Today we're deployed in well over 100 countries around the world, doing everything from printing in public locations like airport lobbies, and hotel lobbies and public libraries, all the way to global secure enterprise printing in multinational corporations. We can be deployed on-premise behind the firewall or in the cloud. It doesn't matter to us. It's inherent in the architecture, and it doesn't change anything about the workflows, whether you pick one deployment method or the other, or you migrate from one to the other. And then also know that in 2014, PrinterOn was actually purchased by Samsung Electronics. So today we are a wholly owned subsidiary of Samsung. Here's kind of a diagram of what we say this means in a practical matter. This is literally mix and match any way you want. So literally any user community, whether it's authenticated or guest, any device, meaning smartphone, tablet, laptop, desktop, any printer, small or large, from any manufacturer, any physical location for all of that, and any network or networks interconnecting all of that, including significantly the internet, we can mix and match and set up PrinterOn to handle a secure enterprise printing workflow to meet the needs. So really we say we have three deployment options for the solution. The first is 100% on-premise, meaning every component of PrinterOn that is, let's call it server side, is deployed behind your firewall on your trusted network on-premise. We have our PrinterOn cloud deployment, which means it's running in the PrinterOn cloud and managed by PrinterOn as a managed service, or we have it deployed in a third-party cloud, such as Azure, AWS, or the like, managed by either you, the end client, or Astadia. So one level deeper, what you have here is, for instance, support for Android, Apple, whether it's iOS on iPhones or iPads, or Mac OS X, whether it's on MacBooks or iMacs, or Windows, whether it's Windows on a tablet or a laptop or desktop. On the other end of the diagram, you have any printer brand, And in the middle, you have the ways to submit a printer job, whether it's Microsoft-based, Apple-based, Google Cloud Print, any of mix and match of these methods, or an emerging industry standard called Mopria, which we also support. And then an infrastructure piece, this is where we lay in the deployment method, whether it's in our cloud, on-premise, third-party cloud, or as a managed service, essentially to be run as like a printing utility. All right, let's dive a little bit more into the security piece of it. From a security standpoint, as I mentioned before, all of the services in our architecture run over TLS or SSL, if you want to call it, between one component and the other, and between the component and the printer, and between the server side and any mobile or desktop device. When you talk about the mobile end of things, many organizations have what's called a mobile device management platform deployed. And we support that for the mobile apps to be able to control the print function through deployment of the MDM. We also boast that we can deploy our services without the use of VPNs, which means you can reach destination printers not on the trusted network, but still securely without having to deploy VPN technology to do it and manage it as well. And we have a broad-based set of methods to do user authentication and authorization for parts of the service as to what they can and cannot do. As far as features, well, as we said before, any cloud, this is sort of our claim to fame. But underneath that, the tools that we have in the software to implement the workflows broadly fall into these categories. First, mobile apps. We have a broad and very powerful set of mobile apps for iOS and Android. We do something called remote printing, which I'll explain in a moment, which is essentially the ability to do secure print to off-network printers without giving that destination network access to your trusted network. We do something called Secure Release Anywhere, which is our trade name for a printing term called pull printing. And this is the ability for a user to submit a print request without having to specify the exact printer that they want when they submit the request. Instead, when they reach the printer, they get to authenticate on the printer, and the print job is automatically delivered to the printer of their choice. And then finally, something we call printware, which is essentially our Windows printing subsystem, which takes the place of file print in Windows and allows us to deliver a print request to any printer in the service directly, natively, from any Windows application. Here's a little picture that's a little more detailed about security. On the left-hand side, we have the various ways to submit a print job, whether it's by forwarding an email, uploading a document to a secure web portal, mobile apps, MDM, even desktop printing, and how that makes it into the service, and how the service actually renders and encrypts the print job, and then it's delivered through a component of the service to its destination printer, encrypted all the way where it's finally decrypted and delivered to the actual printer device itself at the very end, depending on the authentication that's set up in the system to release a print. Okay, let's dive a little bit more into architecture and deployment. Essentially, this is what we're talking about. At the top of the slide here shows the diagram of the classic before, and at the bottom shows a classic diagram of after implementing PrinterOn. So essentially, in the top part of the diagram, you see you have what's represented as a head office, and in this case, one remote location, but it could be many, and it could be global. And essentially, classically, what you have is a set of servers that service print requests that are located centrally in the network. And this is fine for workflows where the submitter and the print device and the servers are all on the same trusted network. And even if the remote location is on the trusted network, via MPLS or even dedicated VPN technology, this still works okay, even though that gets more complicated and expensive as you proliferate the number of locations. But where people are wanting to go with this, especially in the middle of a cloud-based strategy, migration strategy, is they say, hey, we want to just be able to remove the on-premise infrastructure dedicated to delivering print services and put that in the cloud such that you have an any-to-any situation that no matter where the user is, mobile, on-premise, or what location they're at, they can securely reach any printer in the network and in the remote printing use case, even off the network. This is what we enable. So let's dig a little bit deeper. If you deploy PrinterOn on-premise, what you have is a services-based architecture where every bit of the services are behind the firewall on the corporate trusted network. And this is really important in certain industries that are either not ready for the cloud migration, or this is the starting point and this is where they're going to begin their journey, or other industries that really have compliance or other kinds of security requirements that they're not allowed to move this into the cloud for one reason or the other. So no internet connection, no data ever leaves the trusted network, all services run on the trusted network. This is completely fine, and PrinterOn has been deployed this way for years. However, since PrinterOn is a secure web services-based architecture, we can deploy it completely in the cloud, and it doesn't make any difference to us. So all the same services can run in the cloud as well, and depending on the workflow requirements, those may run in the cloud as well. For instance, if you're using Office 365 from Microsoft, that service for your email is already in the cloud. If it's on-premise, we can work with that as well. And then we have the management. So if the service is deployed on-premise, well, then it's up to the end user or Astadia to manage the service. If the service is deployed in the third-party cloud, the same holds true. Either the end client or Astadia would manage the service. These two options from a management perspective are essentially the same because all the management in PrinterOn happens through a central web services-based console that can be accessed from anywhere to configure, deploy, and monitor the service deployed in either of these two methods. In the third method, PrinterOn runs a managed service, and PrinterOn essentially takes over this responsibility, also adds the service elasticity, and makes sure that any upgrades, patches, and all of that to the software are taken care of simply as part of the service. If we want to talk about user authentication in the cloud, we have to talk about single sign-on and identity management, as I mentioned earlier. So here's an example. Not everyone knows what this is just yet, but for instance, if you go to Wall Street Journal or WSJ.com, the newspaper, it asks you to log in with your credentials, username and password. But alternatively, you can sign in with Google or Facebook. And this is what we're talking about, is this technology where a third party is actually providing the authentication and trust to be able to access the service. So how this applies to printing is that classically, PrinterOn has been deployed behind the firewall in most enterprises and is interconnected with the existing on-premise AD where the user database is. In many cases, it's not shown here, but there's a reverse proxy services set up in the network to be able to service the authentication request from somebody outside the firewall. And this has worked fine. However, if we're talking about moving the PrinterOn service from behind the firewall into the cloud, this becomes a problem because no longer can we access the on-premise Active Directory where the database is in order to authenticate a user and determine if they're authorized for the service and what aspects of the service they're allowed to use. Well, this is where single sign-on and an identity management service comes into play. Microsoft's Azure Active Directory being one of them. So essentially, in this architecture, PrinterOn is deployed in the cloud. The user attempts to access the service. If they don't have a token or a valid token for them, we send the request back to the Azure AD authentication service in the cloud, where that third-party service actually then presents the user with the credential challenge. And once they successfully pass the test, then we have a valid token for that user to access the service, and we're on our way. PrinterOn fully supports this today with any identity management service that is OpenID Connect compatible, which includes Microsoft Azure Directory, but it also includes identity management providers from these independent companies such as Okta, Centrify, Ping, and OneLogin. Okay, let's talk about mobile printing. Mobile printing is not where the printer is mobile, it's where the user is mobile. And PrinterOn has a very long history of providing mobile printing in a number of different workflows. Of course, the first thing that comes to mind are mobile apps, and PrinterOn has a very robust set of mobile apps for both iOS and Android that encompass all the rich features that you could use with PrinterOn on the desktop, including the ability to find printers that you are authorized to use, and doing things like remotely releasing a print job right from your phone, and supporting multiple services and accounts depending on the complexity of your situation. In fact, PrinterOn really supports the most number of ways to submit a print request from any number of mobile devices to the service and get it out securely to the desired printer. We don't have time to go through all of these today, but the idea here is we make this work the way you want your workflows to work, not the other way around. So let's look at an example. For instance, here's retail banking. And in retail banking, a lot of banks have deployed iPads in the retail branch to service customer requests, which include the ability to print things. But since there is a high security requirement, the iPads are not on the trusted network. In fact, sometimes they're on a network that can only get to the internet. That's it. So how do you print to a printer that is secure on the trusted LAN inside the bank branch? Well, you can do that with PrinterOn, because through the untrusted Wi-Fi and pointing the request to the internet, we can securely access the service behind the firewall and then encrypt and deliver the print job to the trusted printer behind the firewall at the bank branch without having to have VPN connection to this printer, if desired. And this solves a key problem, because the bank wants to give better customer service, but they can't trust the end-to-end connection between the iPad and the printer because it violates their security policy. Now, banking is slowly moving to the cloud, but this is a perfect example of an industry that could deploy PrinterOn behind the firewall to solve this problem today, with iPads in the bank branch needing to print without having to move any component to the cloud until they're ready. A second example is a defense manufacturer, another high security requirement. In this example, there's a mobile printing requirement to print from tablets to a printer, which is authorized as long as the geolocation of the tablet is within a fenced-off geolocated zone, for instance, within the confines of the first building. PrinterOn, in conjunction with deployment using the industry-leading mobile device management providers, can deploy our mobile app onto the tablets such that if the user attempts to print while they're in building A, everything is fine. But as soon as they travel to building B, then the service is unauthorized, and they will not be able to print. And this is an example of the type of flexibility in the platform to satisfy end user requirements for printing, but not violate the security requirements at the same time. So in summary on this point, really what's happened with mobile printing in the enterprise is if there are security requirements needed to limit print, historically IT has not been able to take care of those easily. So what they do is they generally turn printing off. And IT meets their requirements, but users are not happy. What we're saying with PrinterOn, in conjunction with our infrastructure deployed on-premise or in the cloud, it doesn't matter, and the industry-leading mobile device management providers, we can satisfy both requirements. We can make IT happy in meeting the security requirements, and we can give users the flexibility to print when and where they want for whatever workflow they're using. Today, PrinterOn supports these leading mobile device management providers, including AirWatch, Citrix, Good, which is now part of BlackBerry, Mobile Iron, and in the second quarter, we will be supporting Microsoft's platform called Intune. Okay, let's talk about remote printing. This is a difficult concept. Pictures are better than words, so I'm going to try this even though it has only words on the slides. But this is the idea that the printer you want to print to is not on your trusted network. So anytime you have printers that are staying behind and you're moving the application and the print services to the cloud, by definition, you've created a bunch of remote printers because they generally aren't going to be on the same network as the application and the printing services that are now on a network in the cloud. So PrinterOn can still print securely to these printers without the use of VPNs by just simply having an internet connection. And here's an example, a case study on a manufacturing company that uses SAP. And the job was to print to printers that were literally on the other side of the world that were inside a facility owned by a third-party logistics provider. What we were able to do was allow the SAP users to sit at their desk and do the same print submission workflow natively in SAP that they would do if the printer was sitting right next to them. But deliver the print request halfway around the world across the internet securely to a bunch of printers to print out barcode labels for pallets of product that will be shipped from the manufacturer's location and distribution centers. And in fact, there was another nice twist to this one. These were not even page printers. These were actually Intermec barcode label printers. So know that PrinterOn can also support these kinds of specialty printers as well, such as barcode label printers from Intermec or Zebra, or even things like RFID tag encoders and printers that way. So here's a remote printing example in the construction industry. Somebody's on site at a construction site which has really no infrastructure other than the internet. They want to access and print a document in the temporary site office, which has a printer in it, but only connected to the internet. So they submit the request using PrinterOn mobile app through the internet. And again, this is depicted on site, but these services for PrinterOn could just as well be deployed in the cloud. And they have the ability to access the documents they need, render, encrypt the print job, and deliver it securely to the printer that's in the remote office at the construction site, and decrypt it and release it at the printer once it reaches that location. Another example in certain industries that's very popular of remote printing is what we call COHO, or corporate office home office. And this is the idea that the printer that you have in your home office can be treated securely as an enterprise printer without having to have a dedicated VPN connection set up to that printer. So in industries such as insurance or any other industry that has a large home-based workforce, This is popular because the same printer that could be used for personal purposes can be used for corporate purposes securely, and all the printing of that printer tracked into the central database and print management tracking software with PrinterOn. Overall, remote printing follows this simple standard template. No matter what the print submission method is, and no matter what network or networks connect that submission request to the PrinterOn service, and no matter if that PrinterOn service is deployed behind the firewall or in the cloud, PrinterOn, with this PDH component of our software, has the ability to deliver this securely to any off-network printer so that you don't need to have a dedicated VPN connection to do it. Of course, it goes without saying it could be delivered to any local printer as well. Let's take a minute and talk about desktop printing. Desktop printing is really the traditional printing of anyone sitting at a desk using a desktop or laptop to submit a print. Mostly it involves Windows, but it can involve legacy host systems like AS400 or mainframe, which we support as well. There are two sub-applications in desktop printing. One is so-called serverless printing, which is the notion of removing on-premise Windows servers and putting the enterprise print service in the cloud, and then pull printing. This is on the other side when the user actually picks up the job, and the idea you don't have to pick your target printer when you submit the job. You only go to the printer you want and then release the job, and it is essentially pulled to the printer. The big thing here and the big driver here, especially in cloud strategies, to minimize on-premise print infrastructure, eliminating Windows print servers and putting it as a service in the cloud. Number one requirement, number one reason why this term serverless printing has become popular. Actually, what it really should be called is Windows serverless print, but it's been shortened to Windows or serverless print. We can support really any of these workflows with this notion, and all these workflows intersect with a Windows print server at some point. We can control the access to the printer, we can maintain the security, and be able to take infrastructure out. Printware is the piece of the software we do it. It's our Windows printing subsystem that's installed on any Windows desktop, laptop, or Surface tablet, and it's the means by which we get the print submitted to the service. The user is presented with a user interface to pick their printer. If it's pull printing, they just pick a queue to print to. And this is a bit of a technical workflow, but this shows how the data flows and the pieces of where it goes to our architecture. And again, everything in the blue rectangle here, this is depicted on premise. This can be picked up and moved to the cloud. It doesn't matter. All these workflows here, whether it's mobile or desktop, whether it's local or remote printer, stay exactly the same. The second application for desktop printing is what we call Secure Release Anywhere, or our true cloud-based pull printing. And the big driver here is to reduce waste, actually, because up to 30% of prints are printed and never picked up by the requester. It produces a lot of waste with the printing service. So this is the idea that the print does not come out on the printer until the user walks up to the printer and actually physically releases the job. This is the number one benefit. But the number two benefit right behind it is the flexibility and security and productivity by taking this kind of a service, putting it in the cloud, and essentially letting any user with any workflow submit a print request to the cloud service and then decide later where they want to print it. And as long as the printer is connected to the cloud service, they can pull the job from the cloud and print it to any printer that's part of the service and do this securely. Here's an architecture picture here of how this is deployed. Again, you'll see any submission method on the left. the PrinterOn service in the middle, deployed on-premise or completely in the cloud, and the ability then to pull the jobs to any remote office that's connected to the central service only by the internet. And again, as long as these remote printers are pointed at the service, whether that's on-premise or in the cloud, they can release the job at the printer of their choice. So really that about wraps it up. I know it's a lot to go over in a few minutes, but essentially, just to recap, hopefully what you learned today about PrinterOn. Well, PrinterOn is secure cloud printing for mobile and desktop for any cloud. How is the architecture built? It's a modular and scalable secure web services component-based platform. What do we do for user authentication and identity management? Well, of course, we can access traditional Microsoft Active Directory or really any other LDAP-based user authentication scheme. But in the cloud era, we also are compatible with any OpenID Connect-based identity management system, including Microsoft Azure AD. We can be deployed fully on-premise in a third-party cloud or in a managed service. All of what we talked about today works exactly the same. It's just based on your IT strategy and where you want to put the cost burdens. What secure mobile workflows can we deliver? Well, we have 12 different types of mobile submission methods, which enable really most any kind of workflow you would have, no matter if it's Windows, iOS, or Android. And then what are the main use cases that secure cloud printing can deliver? Well, we talked about secure mobile printing. We talked about remote printing. We talked about so-called serverless printing and pull printing. So really with that, I'm going to turn it back to Desiree, and I think we are going to head into the Q&A and wrap up.
All right, great. Thank you, Tom. So where do we go from here? We've learned a lot from Steve and Tom on the phone today. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach us at info@astadia.com for more information. We're happy to answer any questions you may have. And also, we have a wonderful special offer for you. We are offering a free 1-hour consulting session with both Astadia and PrinterOn to go over any of your questions you may have on migrating your printing services. This is a great offer, so it's open to everyone. So we would love for you to take us up on our offer and reach out to us at the info@astadia.com. So let's go to Q&A. Just a quick reminder, if you have a question to ask our experts, feel free to type it into your chat box on your screen. We have been receiving questions over the period of the presentation. So let's address some of those ones that we've already received. The first question that was received says, do I have to move all my enterprise print services to the cloud all at once, or can I use a hybrid approach? Steve, would you want to answer this one?
Sure, I can take that. And you can absolutely use a hybrid approach. Deploy on-premise at first, get comfortable, familiar with how it works, and then as you move more things to the cloud and need to take more advantage of what you get from the cloud, move up to the cloud service if you want. Nothing in the workflow is going to change where you have it installed.
All right, great. Next question. I have multiple situations where we need to support printing from mobile devices to printers, physically located behind the firewall. How does PrinterOn handle this? Tom, would you want to answer this one?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. it ends up to be quite a complicated question, but suffice it to say that PrinterOn, being in business for 15 years, has pretty much, we like to think we've seen it all when it comes to mobile workflows. The challenge there is going to be that unlike Windows, which has a standard file print workflow and a standard architecture behind that to deliver a print, there's no such standards for iOS and Android. And although that has evolved a little bit over the last few years, it's still not at the same place it was with Windows. And the most popular question we get is, I have an iOS device, I hit the AirPrint button, which when I'm at home, it shows my printer and I can print. But when I'm on the move or behind the corporate firewall, it shows up and says, no printers found. And this is the most common request we get. We can fix that problem, but there are lots of other things like that. Android has its own sort of issues this way, and it all stems from the issue that there's no standard way to do a mobile print on those operating systems. But we've got that all built into our architecture, and we can handle all of that.
Okay. The next question that just popped up. I have a network of third parties we work with. We have printing workflows that need to print to printers at their locations. However, I don't want to give the partners access to my trusted network. Can PrinterOn do that? Tom?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's actually the classic definition of what we call remote printing. And basically what we're able to do is deliver an encrypted print job to a printer that's at those third-party locations that's not decrypted until it gets to the local LAN of where that printer is. And we can do that over basically a TLS connection. So there's no need for us to basically have that printer at the third party join the domain of the trusted network whatsoever. And secondly, yeah, you can solve this with standing up VPNs to that printer. But what we find is many companies who have this situation have literally dozens of locations they would have to stand up with VPN, and it gets expensive and complicated to manage. And if it goes through a carrier network to set up the VPN, it can take a while to get that all provisioned and rolled out. We can actually set up a remote printer location in PrinterOn in essentially 30 minutes, as long as it can connect to the internet.
Wonderful. Next question. I would like to reduce or even eliminate physical Windows print servers on-premise in order to improve workflow flexibility and reduce IT management costs in hardware and labor. How can PrinterOn do that? Steve, would you want to answer this one?
I can, and a very well worded question and a good question. I know that Tom did address this a bit in the presentation. You know, for most situations, PrinterOn can, using PrinterOn can eliminate the on-premise Windows print server infrastructure, and certainly the cost associated by that, I think is what you're asking, by putting it in as a cloud service, similar to the way you would do it with any data center infrastructure device. And obviously, still no changes to the workflow. Single web-based management console to manage it. So absolutely, in most cases, you can certainly replace on-premise Windows-based print servers. Yes.
All right. Next question. If I am relying on a cloud printing service, doesn't my user authentication also need to be cloud-based? Steve, how about you take this one?
Okay, so another good question, and the answer to that one is not necessarily, but probably. You know, there are certainly ways to use to continue to use an on-premise Active Directory scheme or LDAP in place. It's better if the authentication takes place in the cloud using, say, Azure Active Directory or some of the other OpenID Connect-based systems that Tom mentioned earlier. We also work closely with a VueDS company that has a similar kind of solution that really takes this situation head on. Once again, the answer is PrinterOn is compatible with this today. It can be on-prem or in the cloud, but certainly if you're moving your cloud printing, moving your printing, sorry, to the cloud, it helps to have your authentication take place there as well.
All right, great answer. So that was the last question we had for today. That will conclude today's webinar. So for everyone on the call, we appreciate you joining us today to learn more about cloud printing, and we look forward to you joining us next time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.